What's up, everyone? I'm finally here. I am so sorry. I promised myself like we would not have any technical difficulties this week, and right off the bat, my internet goes down literally like 2 minutes before we're about to start. I'm like, why can't I get into StreamYard? Why can't I stream? But we're here now. Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show with me, your host, Tara Roberts. We're like 18 minutes late, but it is Wednesday, November 12th. We are live. I am taking your questions. Drop them in the chat. I know a lot of you have already got them in the chat. And today is a fun week here. I'm still trying to get all my stuff pulled up because as soon as the internet came back, I was like, okay, let me just go ahead and go live, and I'll pull up my stuff later here as we get situated. But the day started off positive for us. It started off about as good as it can get. We got the news of Jameis Winston starting. Obviously, we've been patiently waiting for this one. I don't know about you guys, but I had hoped all off season that in the season, but of course he wanted to put us through misery and trauma and had us deal with Russell Wilson, probably just because, that would make the anticipation of Jackson Dart so much better. But we're finally here now. We're finally here, and we will talk about this. And also, I'm going to talk about this in detail a lot in a video that I'm going to start sit video that I'm going to drop on my YouTube channel tomorrow. So watch out for that one. But lots of good news with Jameis Winston starting. This kind of like we become pretty comfortable with Wando Robinson as a flex option. But obviously, there was a little bit limited upside. Jackson Dart is fantastic, but we talk about young quarterbacks all the time. They often, they're getting used to the NFL. They often don't push the most volume in the world. And a lot of the times what we love about them from a fantasy perspective is their legs. Jackson Dart was thriving off of, touchdown passes, but also his work on the ground there. But with Jameis Winston, we have the holy grail of volume on top of volume here. Now, sometimes it can go sideways with Jameis. We know that, there's always the chance that it's one of those 0 touchdown, 3 interception games. I don't even want to say that and put that out into the air. At the very least, let's get the 3-3, right? But Jameis Winston starting here, boost up our Theo Johnson as well. And it would for Darius Slayton, but he is dealing with a hamstring injury. So we'll have to see how that looks here. But overall, we're feeling good about it. Potentially boost the running backs as well here because they'll at least get goal line opportunities now that Jackson Dart is not sniping those goal line opportunities. So that is fantastic news. Happy to have Jameis back on board. Then we got extra good news here. Ricky Pearsall caught on camera practicing. Looks like he's close. I mean, this was not so we got news that Bucky Irving and Chris Godwin were at practice on a limited capacity there. We didn't get any kind of the visual evidence of them running around and doing drills or anything that would indicate that they were going to be ready for this week here. But Ricky Pearsall, he looked like a guy that was ready to play here. So I don't know if we'll get it this week, but we're close. I feel like we're on the horizon here. And that's good because I feel like we've been getting a ton of questions about whether or not it's time to drop him or whatnot. And it's interesting because we are finally getting comfortable again with Juwan Jennings. So it'll be seeing, obviously George Kittle having his breakout performance last week. So it'll be interesting to see how Ricky fits into this, but it'll be good because he's been stashed on the bench waiting for usage for here. Not in IR for a ridiculous amount of time. But we finally got our boy here. And then again, Bucky Irvin and Chris Godwin at practice. Encouraging there. I kind of curious in terms of what we can expect from them. Now it's Wednesday. So, of course, tomorrow we'll tell in detail in terms of what we can expect for potentially this week here. But they said the timeline on Godwin was late November, early December. So at least this maybe makes us feel a little bit more comfortable with the possibility of late November being a possibility there. I still say don't panic and pivot away from Tez or, downgrade him in any capacity there, just because we do know that this offense, at the very least, Baker Mayfield does support 3 wide receivers. So, and technically Chris Godwin was not at the point where he was competing with Mike Evans or Emeka Egbuka. So I would not be shocked if we still get flex-worthy, fantasy-worthy Tez Johnson even when Godwin does return. So just keep that in mind there. But let's jump into the chat here. and get these chats going. All right, go ahead and dive right in here, right off the bat from Maggie Blue 2. Thank you so much for the super chat. Oh, thank you. You're taking all the advice and learning so much. Always grateful for the help. 4 and 6, 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, 2 flex, PPR, Mahomes, Manungai, Hunt, White, ETN, Puka, Jefferson, Troy Franklin, Pierce, Worthy, Tez, and Bowers. All right, there. I assume there's a tight end spot, so we got Bowers there for sure. But the running backs are interesting, obviously, because we're for sure going with ETN. And I'll pull up my running back rankings here in a second for you guys to see, because, spoiler alert, that we're going to be talking rankings. I'm going to make like rankings our regular theme here, I think, rest of season, unless we get any other major news that kind of preempts that or whatnot. Maybe we'll do playoff prep or something like that at some point there. And then once we get into the off season, obviously we'll be talking off season stuff and incoming rookies and free agency and all that fun stuff. But when it comes to running backs this week, ETN is our safest bet here. Now, between Kareem Hunt and Rachaad White, that's where things get kind of interesting. Kareem Hunt, I have him at RB 24, and I have Rachaad White at RB 26 right now. Kareem Hunt does not have an ideal matchup. Rachaad White's matchup, in theory, is the better matchup here. My only problem with Rachaad White is that we have seen incredibly inconsistent performances from him recently here. We got, once he took over for Bucky Irving, we felt, good, positive. The receiving upside was really carrying through here. Gave us top 10 performances right off the bat in his first 2 starts there. But after that, he has given us RB 30 and half PPR, RB 30 and half PPR, and RB 32 and half PPR, not reaching double-digit fantasy points. I get uncomfortable, and I know I've talked to you guys multiple times about Sean Tucker and the fact that, again, he is creeping in there. Now, I think I got a comment from someone in one of my videos saying, Sean Tucker didn't have a good week. That's not necessarily true. It was not a very usable week from a fantasy perspective from us. It was only 6 fantasy points. Now, granted, when you look at that, that is very even with the output that Rachaad White gave us. But the man had 9 carries for 53 yards. He did get a target. That was, there are 2 targets and then, catch a pass. Yeah, that's something that we just don't really factor in with him. But that's 2 weeks in a row now. The prior week, he had 12 carries, 42 yards here. So he consistently is outperforming Rachaad White on the ground. Again, I would not be shocked if he continues to creep in there, assuming we don't get Bucky back this week. And again, we got to figure that out. I kind of lean towards maybe we don't get him back just because, again, it's not as if he has come back on a full capacity yet. But again, we'll wait and see here. But assuming that it is still the Rachaad White is the lead back here, Sean Tucker has creeped in and been more successful on the ground here. So quite frankly, while that doesn't make me jump to starting Sean Tucker, it does make me uncomfortable with Rachaad White and move him back further in rankings. So my preference there is to go with Kareem Hunt. We're probably not getting Isaiah Pacheco. I don't think he's been ruled out yet, but the news coming out is that he's not quite ready, which is not shocking because I think they were using a little bit positive, flowery, optimistic timelines in terms of his return. But when you look at the fantasy industry experts, they were saying it was really a multi-week injury there. So I'm not surprised that he's not particularly ready to go here. So at running back, and Kyle Monangai we love, but he definitely took a back seat there to Swift. So ETN and White for sure. And then at wide receiver, Puka Nacua, obviously, we go 100% in on that. And then you need 2 flex. Again, we talked about Rachaad White's lack of upside. So quite frankly, I would fill up the 2 spots in terms of flex options with wide receivers here. So Puka Nacua for sure. And Justin Jefferson. We continue to love Troy Franklin here. And then Pierce is on a bye. But between Worthy and Tez Johnson, I have Tez Johnson ranked higher here. I'm uncomfortable with Worthy. I'm going to do, oddly enough, in the video that I'm going to drop tomorrow, I'm going to talk about Worthy and the lack of production he has had. I just think he's taken far too much of a backseat to Rashee Rice there. And quite frankly, he wasn't performing at top tier level before that. Obviously a plan through the shoulder injury. At this point, it just doesn't. And then we have, Patrick Mahomes doing a lot of scrambling there. And he's just locked in on Rashees. And Travis Kelce has had a little resurgence here in terms of his uptick in volume. So quite frankly, I'm not super comfortable with Worthy. For your flex, I would go with both Tez and Troy Franklin there. Troy Franklin, who was maybe taken over as the wide receiver one there. I've moved him up. I've moved him up in rankings last week, but I'm moving him up again this week because we got to trust it at this point. We got to trust it. All right. Jumping back to questions here from Gwen P with the super chat. Thank you so much, Gwen. Pick 2 quarterbacks in half PPR. Oh, this is a good one. From Twain, McCarthy, and Williams. Let's go to the quarterback rankings here. Let's see how quickly I can get those up. As I said, because of the internet, I was not prepared with all of my images loaded up here, but I'm going to be fairly quick here. And we are going to go to, boom, there we go. All right, let's hide the question here so we can look at the quarterbacks in full. Oh, and we got to hide my banner here as well. Boom, there we go. Quarterback rankings, very standard up here at the top. Josh Allen, Drake May, Jalen Hurts, we're looking for the rebound here this week. Lamar Jackson, also looking for a little bit of a rebound there. Justin Herbert, one to keep your eye on. He's still up there in terms of, disappointing performance last week against Pittsburgh, where he should have really, really had a much higher volume matchup. I talked about this in the trade video that I dropped yesterday. Keep your eye on that one. I'm low-key concerned that the offensive line is a major issue. I am giving him mea culpa this week just because the matchup against Jacksonville is extremely favorable. We saw them get lit up by Davis Mills last week. Davis Mills, who is a starting quarterback this week, by the way, more than likely. It doesn't sound like, poor CJ Stroud, doesn't sound like he is on track to clear concussion protocol here. So that'll be interesting. Davis Mills as a potential little streaming option there in a good matchup against Tennessee there. But he was just barely outside my top 25, top 24. He is QB 25 for me. But again, up there at the top, we've got Justin Herbert, who sat out practice today, but they said not a major issue. Or sorry, Lamar Jackson, who sat out practice, not a major issue. Justin Herbert, Matt Stafford, I've raised up in the rankings just because of how incredibly hot he's been lately. Dak Prescott in a good matchup here. Baker Mayfield, good bounce back last week. Joe Flacco, obviously. We've seen him against Pittsburgh before. He did fantastic, top 10 performance, so top 10 quarterback this week, easy. Patrick Mahomes against Denver. I've moved him back in the rankings. My spirit wants to move him back a little bit, but at the end of the day, he's still Patrick Mahomes. Denver's defense has been on fire regardless of Patrick Surtain being out. So it does make me a little bit nervous. So I've moved him back to QB 10, but I'm going to let him stay right there and not move him back too much there. But then we get to Caleb Williams there at QB 11. Caleb Williams, who had been like super inconsistent earlier in the season, very like even in games that should have been layup matchups, right? Like he could get, New Orleans just underperformed wildly. Baltimore, what should have been a good matchup, underperformed. But for the past 2 weeks, top 5 performances, lit it up against Cincinnati, turned around and lit it up against the New York Giants, obviously 2 very favorable matchups here. And now we've got this matchup against Minnesota, which can be very favorable as well. Now, it can be difficult, right? But the good news is that we have seen him against Minnesota already. We've got the evidence here. That was week 1. And obviously, defensive adjustments can be made. Brian Flores is obviously a very strong defensive mind there. So he'll figure out a way to try and handle Caleb Williams this time around. But in week 1 against Minnesota, we got 24 fantasy points, a nice QB 9 performance. Perhaps he is on track here. We got DJ Moore that's questionable, so he may be without a weapon, but quite frankly, does it super matter? I mean, DJ Moore had that one standout performance, obviously came down, crashing down last week. I'd be kind of excited to see Luther Burden in there. Ignite and maybe bring some like deep firepower into this offense as well. So not too worried there. Obviously the tight end weapons super good there. So for all of the lack of trust that we had for Caleb Williams earlier in this season, I feel like we do have to lean into it now with these back-to-back strong performances. It feels like he's on track, figuring things out. And more importantly, from a fantasy perspective, more so than anything, he has finally gotten that run game back on track. And that's the key there, because for a while in the mid portion where things were getting shaky, a lot of that issue was obviously inconsistency through the air was an issue. But at the end of the day, a big part of that was that his rushing volume came down significantly. So Ben Johnson has already, obviously figured out a way to correct that, getting him more movement, getting him more design runs here. And from a fantasy perspective, it just makes him so much safer. So yeah, we're back. Caleb Williams is back in our circle of trust here. JJ McCarthy, obviously that was the second part of the quarterback question there. JJ McCarthy has, by the way, I've got Jordan Love in there at QB 12. That one is the one that I'm probably the most concerned about there. It's a good matchup, so we're leaning into it, but he has looked very shaky, but good matchup. So we have to still give him that top 12 quarterback ranking there. But then Aaron Rodgers in the excellent matchup against Cincinnati. He did fantastic against them in the first matchup. Marcus Mariota with the rushing upside and a good matchup against Miami. And then JJ McCarthy against Chicago. In theory, I could move him up a little bit there. That is right on par with Fantasy Pros consensus. They've got him at QB 15 as well. Up to this point last week, QB 14, week prior to that, QB 13. He's been very solid. He's got the rushing upside. And last week should have been a better performance, right? Justin Jefferson, quite frankly, whiffed and destroyed the fantasy day for JJ McCarthy there. It should have been a top 10 performance there, but Justin Jefferson missed a touchdown. He was just lackadaisical, but at least they know and they addressed it. They acknowledged that it happened. So hopefully that'll be fixed next week and he'll have a nice little attitude adjustment there. Good matchup against Chicago. That's the only thing that makes this potentially questionable here, but I still want to lean into the consistency that Caleb Williams has shown, the upside and the increased rushing upside there. So I would go with Caleb Williams on that one. Jumping back to the rest of the question there. You've got two quarterbacks there. Okay. I should have read ahead. So we've got two quarterbacks. So yeah, Caleb Williams. And then between Flacco and Allen. Yeah, I still lean towards Allen. Last week was very frustrating for sure. In terms of the lack of performance there that he gave, but we do lean into Josh Allen still. That was just a weird one right there. It's tough not to trust Flacco or not to play Flacco because he's been a consistent top 10 there, but we'll lean back towards Josh Allen. And then pick two wide receivers between Washington, McMillan, Pearsall, BTJ, and Tillman. If BTJ plays, I low-key am leaning, and I assume the Washington is Parker Washington on that one. If BTJ is active, I don't know if we're going to get Pearsall. And I don't know if I would trust Pearsall in the first game back, just because you've got other stable options there. And, Kyle Shanahan does tend to be like an untrustworthy person sometimes in terms of snaps and targets there. He could be on the field just running around and not getting targets like we got with George Kittle in that first game back for him. So I'll knock Ricky Pearsall off of that one. But if BTJ is active, I do think I would lean BTJ as long as we get that he is active on a full snap count and no issues. I would lean that direction. Otherwise, it would be Washington and McMillan. So if BTJ is active, I would take that risk and go with BTJ and McMillan. If not, just call it Washington and McMillan and call it a day there. And then pick full PPR. Pick one between May and Jackson. Drake May higher on that one. And then rank 4, which is crazy to say Drake May ranked higher than Lamar Jackson, but Drake May has got us. He's got us to that level now. And then rank these 4 in flex. Henry, Judkins, Henderson, Roma Dunze, DK Metcalf, and then pick one between Gadsden and Naughton. Gadsden practiced in full. Yay. Thank goodness, because there were a couple of leagues where I was not looking forward to try and find another option there at tight end. So Gadsden, we should be good to go with. I will have him ranked higher than Kate Otten. Full practice, health should not be an issue there. So back to the flex between Derrick Henry, Quinshon Judkins, Henderson, Odunze, and Metcalf. I am going to So let me show my running back rankings here, because I am going to answer this contrary to, well, no, maybe not contrary, a little bit slightly. No. Yeah, slightly contrary to my rankings here, because I've got one issue with Derrick Henry. So we for sure we feel good about Travion Henderson, right? And Rome Odunze, even though obviously he has been inconsistent, but we're writing him off of the hot hand here. So Rome Odunze and Trey Henderson before Odunze is the trustworthy option. And then I do have to rank, in terms of trustworthiness and potential upside there, Judkins ahead of Henry. It's contrary to the ranking, the way that I have it ranked here. But the reasoning for that is, if you've got safer options, and this is like for everybody, Derrick Henry's matchup is dreadful. Highly uncomfortable with it. In theory, if I was wild enough, and you can't really do this as a ranker because it's just like kind of ridiculous and irresponsible, because we always say start your suds, right? But if I had the ability to, Derrick Henry would be moved down into a highly untrustworthy category. And it's just the problem of, we've seen him against Cleveland, and we know Cleveland's run defense. And while he could certainly put up an adequate game, like, it's not outside the realm of possibility here, because, looking back to the last season, obviously we have references of multiple games against Cleveland. He did have one good game last season against Cleveland, but typically it's not a good matchup for him, unfortunately, there. And earlier this season, he had literally 2 fantasy points against Cleveland, 11 carries for 23 yards. I am terrified to start Derrick Henry in this matchup here. So if you've got a bevy of options right here like you do, you just need to go ahead and pivot to one of the other ones there. So I would rank it, unfortunately, in terms of who I would go with, as Henderson, Odunze, Judkins, Metcalf in a really good matchup here, and then Derrick Henry, just because he legitimately is a risk to get very, very low fantasy production in this matchup. It feels weird, but unfortunately that is the direction that we do have to go there. But thank you for that wonderful question there, and the super chat, Glenn. Really appreciate that. But yeah, going over the rest of these running back rankings here. Off the top here, we've got Christian McCaffrey, Devon Achane, Bijan Robinson. Yes, I know the frustrations that we have around Bijan Robinson, and Tyler Allgeier's involvement, but we do have to still roll with Bijan Robinson. Jahmyr Gibbs, Josh Jacobs, James Cook, Rico Dowdle, and Ashton Genty. Genty is the one that has made me question a little bit here, because the matchup against Dallas is theoretically good, right? And we should have high volume in this game, but it also feels like one of those matchups that could go a little bit sideways. It is a primetime game. Geno Smith in a primetime game, it just makes me tilt my head a little bit there. This is a really good matchup for Genty, so he remains in the top 10. Wish he could go a little bit higher, but I do have to be a little bit apprehensive there. Then Saquon Barkley, Jaylen Warren, who is excellent matchup here. We, trust him as a RB1 in this matchup here. Kyren Williams has been very steady, strong over the past couple of weeks here. I'm a little bit higher than consensus on him. Javonte Williams with an excellent matchup here. Travion Henderson, no Ramondre Stevenson here, so we are rolling with him again this week. Terrell Jennings, obviously not ranked here, but for reference, Terrell Jennings is listed as questionable. Obviously last week he got injured, so we didn't see a significant amount of him. It'll be interesting to see if he does return in this game, if he does return back to where he was prior in terms of getting some of those goal line opportunities there, especially since, again, we did technically see Travion Henderson struggle at the goal line, unfortunately, in this matchup, which is not, hey, we're not panicking over that. It's food for thought when Ramondre Stevenson returns. But again, Henderson is talented enough that, hey, if the goal line opportunities don't come, it is what it is. He can score from, 30 yards out, right? Breece Hall, who despite the complete ineptitude of the Jets organization as a whole, and hey, they bounced back well in spirit last week. But in terms of the offensive struggles in the pass game, it just the fact that they can't pass the ball, but Breece Hall can still be successful. I mean, it tells you everything you need to know about him. And then, how we look at him in 2026, hopefully in a better situation. I don't know, maybe still with the Jets if they franchise tag him. Hopefully he wouldn't willingly re-sign with them, but I think franchise tag is probably on the table for him. But something to think about there because he has been excellent, and I like his upside as well here. Matchup is not ideal with New England, but again, he's done well in not so awesome matchups. And with Garrett Wilson out, obviously that does significantly increase his upside in terms of pass catching opportunities there. So we could see some increased volume through the air there for Breece Hall as well. So he remains a very solid borderline RB1. Chase Brown, very steady and consistent with Joe Flacco there. Derrick Henry, we talked about Quinshon Judkins. He's been a little underwhelming, unfortunately, recently, but we're still rolling with it. DeAndre Swift, been very steady. Travis Etienne, steady. Kamani Vidal had the bounce back week last week. I mean, he's obviously been inconsistent, right? But the offensive line struggles don't seem to affect the run game as much as they do the pass protection there. Just FYI on that one. Then Aaron Jones has been very steady in his return. Has kind of pushed Jordan Mason out of the way. And oddly enough, did get a goal line touch as well, to goal line touchdown, I think inside the 5 or so. So good news for Aaron Jones that they are potentially leaning on him as the clear 3 down back there, which does kind of make sense because he missed time there. So the main concern with Aaron Jones overall was the workload for him. And if he missed time, they probably feel a little bit more comfortable with him getting increased workload there to close out the season and try to push on to the playoffs there. And then Woody Marks taking over as the RB1. In case it makes you maybe a little bit nervous regarding Woody Marks, the good news is that this matchup against Tennessee, that is the matchup where he had his breakout performance with like 26 fantasy points. So we feel really good about Woody Marks. Quite frankly, RB22 is probably underselling it a little bit there. Then RJ Harvey, obviously, should in theory rise up these rankings. This is more of a preliminary thing and more also about the fact that Kansas City is a terrible matchup against the run, quite frankly. So he's going to have to earn it through the air here, but this should be our first look at him as the RB1 here, unfortunately, with J.K. Dobbins dealing with the injury here. And then Kareem Hunt, talked about a little bit there as well. Moving back to the questions here, let's put me back into the single format here. We'll do some questions and then we might take a little bit of a break here. But going back to the questions here, and if I miss any of your questions, because I'm going to go, obviously we've had a ton coming in and I'm super behind here. And then also in the questions, feel free to I see people doing this. Always feel free to answer people's questions and interact in the chat. That's, super cool for sure. Going to the chat here. I'm at the bottom. So again, drop questions again so we can work through it. David Berger here. Hurts or Flacco this week? I am still going with Hurts this week for the upside here. And again, obviously last week was a total disaster. It was 12 fantasy points. But to be fair, obviously Green Bay's defense can be borderline in terms of how they perform. And it can be a difficult matchup if they pulled everything together there. So we are going with the Jalen Hurts bounce back here. Detroit is a matchup that should encourage more pass volume. That's how games with Detroit typically tend to go. They do tend to be a bit more stout against the run there. So we should see some increased pass volume here. And we've also got, which, cross our fingers, we've also got AJ Brown in the media talking to us as fantasy managers, telling us, hey, don't start him. Yeah, and he's obviously disgruntled and unhappy. When you get disgruntled and unhappy receivers, often a quarterback will hyper target him. So we might see a little bit more increased pass volume and a little bit more favoritism there towards AJ Brown to rub his back and make him feel a little bit happier there. So Flacco is definitely a safe start. Again, we've seen this matchup, him against Pittsburgh. He is sitting out practice, but honestly, I don't feel super uncomfortable with him. It's the shoulder injury. He played through it and he's coming off a bye week. So it's probably just veteran rest, nothing to panic over. But in the first matchup against Pittsburgh, he had 26 fantasy points, finished his QB6. So he's a very safe option. I just continue to lean towards Jalen Hurts again for the matchup that should encourage more pass volume. And then he's also got his rushing upside there. Let's see here. Yeah, the good comment here from Ty our own. Dallas will be playing with extra incentive, giving the recent passing of one of their teammates. Dak will be airing it out and running, and the defense will definitely be playing with pep. And this is going to be our first time seeing their defense with their well, not first time, right? But we're going to see how this defense is shaping out, right? As they continue to integrate the first time because they were on the bye week. That's right. We didn't see them. They made the trades and they were on the bye last week. Thank goodness. I need CD Lamb back in quite a few leagues. Yeah, we haven't seen this new defense. Okay, they had the bye week to integrate these guys in. So it'll be interesting to see how their new defensive pieces line up, because obviously when we were looking ahead, like this will be very meaningful for us in terms of adjusting our rest of season rankings and playoff schedule rankings here, because often any of these teams that have matchups with Dallas, we were obviously pumping them up like, okay, we've got a layup matchup here against Dallas, and it'll be interesting to see how these new additions make a difference here. Now, granted, Dallas's defense was still very exploitable last year, even with Micah Parsons. Let's be honest there. And they've, quite frankly, over the years, they've always been a team that has not been one that the defense has not been one that has just stifled offenses, but created a lot of turnovers. So from a fantasy perspective, it worked for us on both ends in terms of, okay, yeah, cool. We'll play offensive players against them and we'll start their defense at the same time because they'll generate turnovers. So it'll be interesting to see what this new defense looks like here for sure. Thank goodness. Yeah. I mean, it's, and it's ridiculous from an offensive perspective. I mean, Dak is a top 10 quarterback this week. Javonte is a top 12 running back. We'll look at wide receiver rankings here in a second. CD is obviously top 10 and Pickens is top 15, I believe here. And obviously Jake Ferguson is top 5 or probably top 5. I can't remember. We'll look at rankings in a second there. But yeah, all systems go on them for sure. Henry Odom lost Harrison Jr. Yeah, that was crazy. Unfortunate. The appendicitis there. Who should I pick up rest of season, Pearsall or Tez? So I would assume, appendicitis. I'm trying to think. We had another player that was out with appendicitis, and I want to say he missed. Let me not say because I can't remember accurately, but it shouldn't be too long-term of a loss there. I would assume. And I think Arizona already had their bye week. Did they? Let me just double check on that for you. Well, I should have. Let's see. Arizona. When they already had their bye in week 8. So it's it seems unfathomable that you would be able to play a week after getting surgery on your appendix. But really, I've had appendicitis. Quite frankly, the incisions aren't anything serious, so I wouldn't be shocked if you get them back in after next week, maybe after next week. So shouldn't be a too long-term issue here, in my opinion. But between Pearsall and Tez Johnson, it depends on if we are able to get Pearsall back this week. Rest of season, I would lean towards Pearsall over Tez, and that's tough, right? Chris Godwin coming back to practice kind of put a little bit of fear in me, but again, it's entirely possible that Tez operates more so as the more steady wide receiver 1. Especially because from a touchdown perspective, he's been on fire. And if Baker Mayfield continues to look for him once they get to the red zone, that will always put him as a priority over Godwin as well. And then with Pearsall, again, he has competition with Kittle and Juwan Jennings as well. And then at some point we should get Brandon Ayuk back. So both of these guys are in situations where they have extreme competition. I would probably lean towards Pearsall. But if you lost Harrison Jr. this week and you need something that is more pressing for this week and next week, I would lean towards Tez on that one. Again, Marvin Harrison Jr. with the surgery there, probably not an extremely long absence. I would say Tez can probably get you by over that time period. Abreu, AJ Brown, Washington, I assume Parker Washington, Tez, and then Franklin pick 2. So I mentioned AJ Brown. We're going with the squeaky wheel theory of the fact that he has whined I can't cuss on this channel because of ads. Whined, cried, and moaned about his targets and usage in the offense, that he'll get his fair share this week so that he doesn't have to sit on the end of the bench and read a book and be frustrated. So yeah, we're still going AJ Brown there. And then between Washington, Tez, and Franklin, it's Franklin that I have the highest. And reasoning for that, and it's close between him and, well, actually, you know what? Scratch that. I lied. I have Tez higher. Tez is my wide receiver 24, and Troy Franklin is wide receiver 26 there. Troy Franklin's matchup against Kansas City is not ideal. I don't think it's a complete shutdown situation, but we don't love it. I would feel much more comfortable. Again, like alignment-wise, it'll be interesting to see who has the tougher coverage between him and Courtland Sutton. I would assume Courtland Sutton would still have the top-tier coverage there. So again, not an ideal matchup. Tez Johnson, Buffalo has been a pass-friendly matchup there. So AJB and Tez on that one. Parker Washington, we do have the slight concerns there. And let's look at wide receiver rankings while we're talking about wide receivers here for a second. I'll get those pulled up here. Wide receiver rankings. Nope, that's not wide receivers. Oh, wait. No. That's wide receivers. There we go. Boom. Okay. Wide receiver rankings there. Parker Washington is absent from the top 24, unfortunately, here because of the fact that we do have he got the hamstring injury, so that's not cool. He popped up on the injury report with a hamstring injury. It's Wednesday, so it might not be a big deal, but it does make you a little bit nervous there, especially when we consider that Brian Thomas Jr. did practice in a limited capacity. Britton Strange is designated to return from IR and did practice in a limited capacity as well. Yay, that's awesome. So if you're looking for potential tight end streamer as well, if you're maybe running a little bit thin there, Britton Strange was decently reliable in terms of getting you close to wide receiver or tight end one performance there. So one to keep your eye on there, especially in deeper leagues. Hopefully no one's watching. I have a claim put in on him in one league that I hope goes through for tomorrow. But when we're looking at Brian Thomas Jr. and then what potentially playing there, Britton Strange potentially playing there, and then what we should assume will be increased usage of Jakobi Meyers this week as well. And what clearly was intentional usage. I think that Liam Cohen likes Jakobi Meyers. Well, they traded for him. They like him a lot there. But I think the way that he has spoken about him, I think he's excited to use him as a weapon there. So, and especially from a goal or from a red zone target perspective, we did see him get what should have been a touchdown, but was called back. Well, it was a penalty, but was called back by a penalty. But we did get that target there in the red zone. So that is pretty interesting. So I think Parker Washington to me is still a very safe flex option, but he does move further back in the rankings because he could be dealing with a lot more competition this week, unfortunately there. But looking at these wide receiver rankings here, and then we're going to take a little quick break here. Obviously at the top, there's not a lot of question marks here. Jamar, Drake London, Puka, Jackson Smith and Jigba, CeeDee Lamb, Emeka Ibuka, Rashee Rice, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Adams, Ladd McConkey there, T. Higgins, obviously excellent matchups. So T. Higgins, George Pickens, AJ Brown, we talked about, Stephon Diggs with the bump up in this week. This is a good matchup for him. And again, we don't have Kayshon Boutte here. So we've got the uptick in volume again for all of those wide receivers there in New England. And again, on the wide receivers there in New England, they have become a little bit more trustworthy. And, it's funny. And I don't really understand this one, but, and perhaps maybe this week I will be wrong. But, one thing that's interesting about New England is that Hunter Henry is still viewed as a viable streaming option at tight end. I don't view it that way. I would love for him to prove me wrong this week. That's cool. I mean, it don't matter to me. I don't have him rostered anywhere. But he's ranked in Fantasy Pros ECR as tight end 14. I have him ranked as tight end 25. He is finished. The last time that we saw him have a top 10 performance was in week 4 against Carolina. Since then, he is finished as tight end in Half-PPR. Tight end 26, 33, 25, 15, 21, and 44. I fail to see the trust, the unbridled trust that we have. Or I get that it's a good matchup, right? Because the Jets defense has been gutted, but they've been in good matchups before. So I mean, I can't get on board with this one. I mean, 10 times over, I would just lean several different directions on this one, unfortunately. I mean, you can go with, you've got obviously the Cleveland tight ends are heavily favored there by Dylan Gabriel. Zach Ertz finally had a good game there with Marcus Mariota. Mark Andrews has become very reliable in terms of touchdown equity. You can turn to Kyle Pitts. Dalton Schultz has been fantastic. Theo Johnson, we've talked about ad nauseum, who is getting Jameis Winston. Theo Johnson has been extremely reliable. I mean, even with Garrett Wilson out, we'll probably get the same hyper, the one Mason Taylor game that was good was when Garrett Wilson was out in week 8. So keep that in mind that we could see again another streaming Mason Taylor week because there are no other pass catching options there. So there's just like 10,000 different directions that I would go with. But that was an offshoot of talking about Stefon Diggs and the increased upside that he has had. He's got mouths to feed there, Stefon Diggs. So he's very incentivized to do well there. Rome Odunze has bounced back very well. Devontae Smith, DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is an interesting one. I want to lean into him. My heart says to move him down in the rankings a little bit here. In this last matchup against Cincinnati, Aaron Rodgers was fantastic. We talked about it before when we talked about the QB rankings. He had a top 7 performance, I want to say. And yet DK Metcalf had a terrible game. Very mediocre performance. That was the game, I believe, that Aaron Rodgers hyper-targeted like 5 million tight ends. And Pat Freiermuth went on. Actually, I can check it here real quick just to verify. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. That was the game where Pat Freiermuth went off. All the tight ends got a touchdown. Freiermuth had 2 touchdowns. Yeah, Darnell Washington had a touchdown. So we could get a repeat of that, or we could see the game plan switch up and we get hyper targeted to DK Metcalf. He's further back just because it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So honestly, when I answer start set questions, DK will obviously be towards the bottom there in terms of trustworthiness, given the fact that he put up mediocre production in this matchup beforehand, but it is a good matchup. It is. Then Juwan Jennings has worked his way back into our circle of trust. We might adjust this if Ricky Pearsall is back, but we need details in terms of how back he is, right? Then we have Deebo Samuel, mediocre-ish production with Marcus Mariota there. Jamison Williams creeping into the top 24 here. I honestly think I'm even a little bit lower than consensus on him here, just because there's a couple other guys that I like, but he's been on fire here, and this matchup is not ideal for him, but he has been on fire. And then Tez Johnson we talked about here. So again, these wide receiver rankings, pretty standard there. No major differences here. But jumping back to the chat here, and then we got to take a break because I kind of forgot here. Yeah, Jazz here said appendicitis is usually about 2 weeks. So yeah, you probably lean towards, when we're talking about Tez Johnson versus Ricky Pearsall there, probably lean towards the potential short-term upside of Tez there to get you by. You probably won't have to deal with Marvin Harrison Jr. being out a significant amount of time there. Ella said, hopefully the appendicitis explains the drops. That appendicitis can, I got appendicitis when I was pregnant. That was not fun. I thought that I was just like having pregnancy pains. And then I was like, this is not normal. And it turns out I had appendicitis and had to get an appendectomy while I was pregnant. That was not fun. My recovery was not as smooth as Marvin Harrison Jr.'s will likely be there. From Steve McQueen, hoping the red zone targets swing back over to Ibuka this week. Potentially there, or, deep touchdowns for him as well. That is my preference here for him. And then with Miles Logan saying with Harrison out, would Mike Wilson be a potential move? Yes. Zay Jones. Was Zay moved? I think Zay was ruled out. Let me double check if Zay was ruled out. Yeah, I've already removed him from my rankings. I think he was just completely ruled out there. So, Marvin Harrison Jr. out. Zay Jones not going to be in there. What is Dortch? I want to say he's out too. Is he? Yeah, I want to say he's out as well. So it might be a heavy Michael Wilson. Well, obviously a massive day there for Trey McBride there, but we could finally see an increased big volume there for Michael Wilson there, and then that also would potentially bump up Amari DiMercado from a passing perspective as well. Gonna hitch there. Okay, yeah. Let's take a quick break here, and then I will be right back here after we hear a word from our sponsor. And I will be right back after this.
Oh, working out so important for your health, for your sex life, for everything, just everything in general. I perform better across the board, podcasting, you name it. The last thing I need to be thinking about is, creating a new workout routine. That's why we have FITBOD. It prevents you from plateauing. It's so customizable in that I have one super strong shoulder and one kind of weak shoulder. And yet the FITBOD app helps me customize my workouts to improve the strength and the endurance. I go in, my physical therapist is like, I can't believe you're doing this many. And I'm like, I know. Can you believe this? And he's like, yeah, this is crazy. So level up your workouts. They have over 1,000 demonstration videos. And join FITBOD today to get your personalized workout plan, which includes 25% off, or try the app for free for 7 days. Go to fitbod.me/player, fitbod.me/player, FITBOD/player for 25% off for 7 days free.
All right, jumping back here, we got a super chat from RG. One RB, one flex, ETN, Hendo, Devontae, QJ, Harvey, and Goddard. You got a bevy of choices here. I lean towards going with the running backs here. Again, Devontae has been fairly steady-ish in terms of getting the higher volume, particularly compared to AJ Brown there. But it's still not a massive ceiling. It's been okay, but he's had, double-digit fantasy points in the past 3 games here. He has been more steady and consistent. It's tough to sit him. Henderson is the one that I have ranked the highest for sure. So that's the easy one there. And then it is between Devontae and ETN there. Harvey, again, we love him as the RB1. It's just a bad matchup is the only issue there. So between ETN and Devontae, the safer option is going to be to go with ETN. He's had a fairly steady floor there. Matchup is not the most ideal. Let me check and see again here where I have him ranked at RB19. And again, this is the LA Chargers, so unfortunately we have no rematch anything. But he has had 14 and 15 fantasy points in half-PPR over the past 2 games, top 10 performances here. It's tough to pivot away from that. And for reference, those have not been in really good matchups either. So he is getting volume and some increased opportunities there with the pass game being a little unreliable there. So I lean towards Henderson for sure. ETN for the safe option. But if you need a high upside swing, if you're the underdog in this matchup, go with Devontae over ETN. So it just depends on which one you need there for sure. Going back to the chat here from Alinda, full PPR, Love or Caleb? Caleb for sure on that one. We talked a little bit about him early, or we talked a lot about him earlier here. Time to trust him. Back-to-back top 5 performances here. And then between Sutton and JMO, I lean towards, I have Sutton ranked higher. than Jameis here. Or do I? Wait. No. Okay, no, I've adjusted. I have Jameis ranked higher in this one. Don't love the matchup with Philadelphia. In theory, if he wasn't ranked higher, then we would flip him back there in terms of being a little bit higher ranked. But JMO is the higher ranked here in this matchup. That's crazy. But yeah, that's the point at which we're at with Courtland Sutton. And also Bo Nix has moved back significantly in rankings. At this point, we're at a low trust level with Bo Nix, unfortunately, there. Super chat from Jay. Tyler Lockett or Michael Wilson, full PPR, and then Jameis or Jameis or Mariota in Superflex. In Superflex, I would still lean towards Mariota here. Obviously, Jameis has extremely high upside, but he does have the lower floor. The rushing upside at least makes Mariota a steady offer or steady option there. I come around to it. Mariota is not my favorite to play. I think I had to move him. Actually, I think I had to move him into my starting lineup this week over another starter because of matchup. I think I'm playing him over Jared Goff in Superflex this week in one league. Just because, again, Mariota, not a wonderful matchup there for Jared Goff. He's moved back in rankings. And then Mariota, not a bad matchup, but the rushing upside carries him. So I would lean Mariota over Jameis. And then between Lockett and Michael Wilson, I would go with Tyler Lockett here. Matchup again. We want to see what this Dallas defense does look like with all of its new fancy little players there. But at the end of the day, it has been a good matchup here. It might take them a little bit to transition to the new and improved version of their defense there. So I do lean towards going ahead and going with Tyler Lockett on that one over Michael Wilson, because we're hopeful that Michael Wilson would get an uptick in targets, but we don't know for sure. We at least know that we have had an increase in targets and that Pete Carroll obviously loves himself some Tyler Lockett there. Good matchup. So safer option is just to go with Tyler Lockett on that one. From Wicked Jester 408, Herbert or Flacco. You know what? Don't test me on that one. No, that's right. I still have Herbert higher on this one. So here's the way that I would play this. I have Herbert higher, but if you are a little bit concerned after last week's performance and maybe you're the favorite and you don't need that Justin Herbert overall QB1 ceiling there, you would rather go with the safety and security of Joe Flacco in an excellent matchup, go with Flacco. I've got Herbert ranked about 4 spots higher than Joe Flacco here, but they're both top 10 options this week. And quite frankly, after what we saw from Justin Herbert with the offensive line, I am a little bit concerned. Jacksonville is a great matchup, but I am concerned that perhaps the offensive line just can't handle the pressure, unfortunately. And we know exactly what to expect out of Joe Flacco against Pittsburgh. So it is Joe Flacco if you just want to go with the safer option there and you don't need that Justin Herbert high upside swing there. From Always Be Great with Vidal Sr. Addison with Justin Jefferson is concerning, and Judkins may lose touches against the Ravens. Should I start Addison, Judkins, or Tez in my flex? And then Rogers, JJ. Oh, you're saying Addison with JJ is concerned. Sorry. I see JJ and I saw Justin Jefferson. I thought you were saying, volume there. Justin Jefferson, JJ McCarthy. That is going to be confusing. Yeah. So Rogers, JJ McCarthy, Tua, Geno, or Purdy if he starts. Definitely Rogers on that one. Again, we have the proof there. It's close between Rogers and JJ, quite frankly. I do trust JJ in this matchup. I don't have a problem with it. I do like him a lot. In fact, I struggle to move him up further in rankings, but I physically can't because you can't move him over guys with, Chicago is such a great matchup, right? It's tough to not move him, especially knowing how he could run all over Chicago's defense in a similar form to Jackson Dart there. But the problem ultimately is that there are guys that just have so much better matchups and reliability ahead of him that I can't get there where I want to be with JJ McCarthy. So Rogers is the one that I would go with here. He's been very disappointing, right? But again, this is a great matchup. We've seen it before. You can't add Trey Hendrickson is out for Cincinnati. So again, the Cincinnati defense is just the most targetable defense that ever existed. But going back to your flex question with Addison, Judkins, and Tez, it is between, so Judkins, again, volume is good, but it's a bad matchup. So you're right to be concerned about that. As long as it's full PPR, between Addison and Tez, I am okay with going with Tez over Addison. Super chat from Brother Pickle 4 is Franklin sustainable? Should we try and sell? I think it is sustainable, but this is not a bad time to sell. Again, I talked about this last week. The thing about and why this is sustainable is that this seems like it's just the coming to fruition of best, but like, so the bond that CJ, and this is not even the same bond, but the bond that CJ Stroud and Tank Dell had, they didn't play college together, but CJ Stroud played with him at the Senior Bowl, specifically requested, hey, I want you guys to draft Tank Dell. This is my guy. They did it. And obviously you saw that instant connection between them. Tez Johnson and Bo Nix have that existing connection. So now that we finally have Tez on the field, Troy Franklin, my bad. Troy Franklin, well, Tez Johnson as well. But Troy Franklin is that was like a Freudian slip there, by the way. Interesting. But Troy Franklin and the existing college connection there with Bo Nix, very clear. And it makes sense. We didn't see a lot of Troy Franklin last week or last year because, Sean Payton sometimes with rookies can be a little bit more apprehensive. So him getting on the field and Bo Nix hyper-targeting him with the connection that they have existing, I'm not shocked. And I don't feel like it's going to go away. And if that's his preference, I'm more inclined to say that it is going to stick around rest of season. Now, if you can get a really good offer for him because there's a lot of people that it's not that they believe in Troy Franklin so much that they are just highly skeptical of Courtland Sutton. There's a lot of anti Courtland Sutton sentiment out there. So for that reason, you can potentially get a pretty penny there for Franklin. So if you want to shop him around and see what you can get, I don't mind that at all. And sell him high, but I do think that it is something that is going to stick around rest of season there. Shout out to Rachel, the Tootsie Pop in the chat. Hey, how's it going? Good question from Abreu. Tez or Worthy? Tez for sure. I don't trust Xavier Worthy. We talked about it a little bit earlier. I've moved him back in the rankings. At this point, he's struggled to reach even double-digit fantasy points. From Ross H. And we're going to go probably about 5 more minutes here, guys, so we can reach the full hour here. And then I got to wrap things up again. I am so sorry about the starting late. My internet decided to have a heart attack literally right before the live. And I was sitting here panicking, trying to figure out why was my stream not starting. Turns out internet had shut down. But yeah, we'll go for about 5 more minutes here. From Ross H, need one flex, QJ, Tet, Addison, Chase Brown, and Henderson. It does have to be Henderson on that. When it's close between Henderson and Chase Brown, I do still like Chase Brown a lot this week in terms of the volume that he's been getting with Joe Flacco, but Henderson with Ramondre Stevenson out on that one for sure. Playmaker, Purdy or Flacco? Flacco on that one for sure. It'll be, if Purdy comes back, that'll be, fantastic, but Flacco has just been steady producing those top 10 numbers for us. He looked fantastic against Pittsburgh, earlier in the season, a few weeks ago, not that long ago. So yeah, Flacco on that one. Owen Daniels, have Barkley, Judkins, Swift, Kyron, Diggs, and Pickens, full PPR. Need 1 running back, 2 flex. Ooh, Barkley. And then for flex, you do have to go with, I can't sit Kyron right now. And then Pickens. Yeah. Matchup wise, you got options, buddy. Yeah. Barkley, Kyron, and Pickens. You got options. From Nay DZ, should I bench Justin Jefferson and play Rice or Ibuka? Yes. I have both of them ranked higher than Justin Jefferson this week. And I like Justin Jefferson. I feel like he can have I feel like he will have a bounce back game just because everyone saw him behave like a child on the field. And even the team has acknowledged it. So I do think that we are going to get a better effort from Justin Jefferson this week. But at this point, the upside, regardless of, has just been so high for Rasheed and Ibuka. I have Ibuka one spot higher than Rasheed just because of, matchup wise. And, Denver won't push me off of Rasheed just because, again, because of how Rasheed lines up 50%-ish in the slot. That means he doesn't have, no, we don't have Pat Surtain regardless, but tougher coverage for Denver does tend to come from the outside guys, right? So the guys in the slot tend to do a little bit better here. So Rashee Rice will have the easier matchup. Xavier Worthy, that's another reason to not like Xavier Worthy here. He will have the tougher matchup, unfortunately, regardless of Pat Surtain not being in there. So that does move him back just one spot behind Ibuka. Good matchup against Buffalo there. We saw that defense get used and abused by Miami last week. And then Kyron or Judkins. I have Kyron higher. He's been so reliable over the past couple of weeks here. From Super Chat from Meggie, Blue 2, drop Worthy for Jennings or Algier. Ooh, I would drop for either one. So we're for sure dropping Worthy for one of those two. If you need, it depends on what you need. If you need somebody that you need to start, that's going to be Jennings. Even with Tyler Algier, obviously getting the touchdown opportunities, Jennings still has been the more solid fantasy producer over the past couple of weeks, and he definitely has a higher ceiling for sure. Not even close there. But if you're looking for the better stash, the better bench stash long-term here, because at some point Jennings will have to deal with Pearsall and Ayuk. So it will get very crowded. So the better start right now is Jennings. The better long-term stash for you is going to be Tyler Algier. So if you don't need either one of these guys to start right now, I would stash Tyler Algier, because if something were to happen to Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier would be a weekly RB1 there for sure. Thank you for the super chat, by the way, Maggie. From HOJ, how do you feel about Chimere Dike? I love Chimere Dike. Yeah, full disclosure on that one. It'll be interesting to see, because we could potentially get Ridley back this week. I don't know. We'll see. But regardless, Ridley has been incredibly underwhelming. It'll be interesting to see what the usage would be. My assumption that it would be Ridley, Iamater, and DK that would be the three primary receivers, and that it would be Van Jefferson that would fall to the background there. Just logically, that's what should happen. Now, how much logic can we depend on from this coaching staff, this interim coaching staff for Tennessee? I don't know that, unfortunately. But I like Chimere Dike long term here. Unfortunately, probably a little too crowded for him. Dynasty, I love him as a potential stash there for the future and next year, once they can get an upgraded team as a whole, an upgraded coaching staff, right? And obviously in leagues with return yardage, he does have that upside as well, for sure. So like him, but deeper leagues for sure. But in more shallow leagues, I don't know if he is worth it on the whole there. I do love him. From Shorty, I have Tat McMillan and trying to package him and Kyle Monangai for Pittman. Fair deal. Yeah, I think it is for sure. And I agree with you on that one. Pittman is a big buy low candidate for me. And I think that is a very appropriate amount. People won't see it that way because perception wise, they'll think of, Pittman or is, McMillan is the better prospect, wide receiver one and whatnot. But Pittman has outperformed him so drastically this season. It's not even close. Quite frankly, even with last week's poor performance, Pittman is literally wide receiver 11 on the season. So yeah, I think that's a perfectly fair deal. And I love that trade. That's a good way to get out of Tet because again, schedule for Carolina is fantastic, but as we've seen, schedule tends to be a little bit agnostic because they are going to be run heavy and they're going to lean on Rico Dowdle and they're not going to have high pass volume for Bryce Young. And their team is just highly inconsistent right now. And despite the fact that their defense is struggling, I do still think that we'll continue to see them just aggressively lean on the run here because that's just been the most successful thing about them. From Gwen P, drop Sutton for Franklin. Ooh, and can we see the tight end rankings? Man, you're testing me on that one, Gwen. I think that I am okay with dropping Sutton for Franklin. I think they're so dead even for me right now. And there's not a massive gap between the two in terms of targets and fantasy performance. But I do think it's tough to trust Courtland Sutton at this point. I don't know. I feel like I would still want to hold on to Sutton and potentially drop someone else for Franklin because I do feel more comfortable with Franklin overall. But man, it's tough to drop Sutton when we know what the talent is and that he could pop at any moment. Let me show that I weaseled around that question so much. I want to pick up Troy Franklin, but I don't want to drop Courtland Sutton for him. I think ultimately that's my call on that one. And then for the tight end rankings, let me hide my banner here for a second so that we can see the full. There we go. No, that is not tight end. Come on there. Let's go. Come on, tight end rankings. There we go. That is tight end rankings. We got Trey McBride, number one. Obviously, Trey McBride, number one here. This could be a record-breaking Trey McBride day. It's tough to outperform what Brock Bowers did earlier in the season with a 3-touchdown game, but we're going to see a ton of Trey McBride. Then Brock Bowers, obviously, we're looking for the bounce-back game here from him. Last week was wild. George Kittle coming off the strong performance. Jake Ferguson. We're still holding strong on him. We have seen some disappointing performances from him. Hopefully out of the bye week, we get back on track here because a lot of the lack of usage has been a little bit inexplicable. We've had the increased usage for other tight ends. I don't know if perhaps they thought that he had a little bit too much wear and tear on him and wanted to give him a little bit of a break there. I can't understand the logic there, but he is the tight end one and he has shown significant upside and we do like the matchup here a lot. Then we have Sam Laporta, has been very strong and reliable. Oronde Gadsden. Oronde I can move up potentially over Laporta and potentially over Ferguson there. When I downloaded these rankings, this was before we got the full practice for him. So given that we got the full practice and we don't have any confusion on his status here, I could move him up to number 4 there ultimately. Then we have Dallas Goedert. Travis Kelce has become very stable and reliable. Cade Otton has definitely worked his way into a top 10 option in the absence of, the lack of receivers with Godwin and Mike Evans. When the wide receiver room is whittled down, Cade Otton is a reliable option. We talked about Theo Johnson and the potential and the reliability that he's shown over, since Jackson Dart has started. And then we all were concerned about Russell Wilson, but we've got no Russell Wilson. We've got Jameis Winston. Yay. So we're good to go there. Dalton Schultz has become very reliable as well. Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is not my favorite. I'm not going to lie there. Kyle Pitts gets the edge over several of the guys behind him purely based off the fact that he is more likely to get volume, but he has underperformed compared to several of the guys ranked behind him, if I'm being honest there. So Pitts has the tight end 12 ranking based off of him being safer in theory with less volatility. But when we're looking at upside options, Mark Andrews has so much more upside than Kyle Pitts. So if you need the high upside swing there, it's definitely Mark Andrews and his touchdown equity. Zach Ertz has higher upside as well. Harold Fannin Jr. has higher upside. David Njoku has shown higher upside as well. Quite frankly, Noah Fant has shown higher upside than him. So yeah, Kyle Pitts is there because he's a safer option and there's less volatility to his volume there. I'm going to pull up his stats real quick here. And Carolina is such a good matchup, right? Really just a fantastic matchup. But when we're looking at Kyle Pitts and his performances of recent, he had a good performance early in the season against Washington, but since the bye week in week 5, his ceiling has been 10 fantasy points. That came twice against San Francisco and Miami. It's not impressive. His best finish on the season was tight end 4. The next best finish was tight end 9. Outside of that, it's just been wildly kind of, underwhelming. The past 2 games have been 6 fantasy points, 5 fantasy points. So he gets targets. That's what makes him someone that you can lean to over the other guys, because hey, at the very least, I'm looking at 5 to 10 targets for Kyle Pitts. Like I know that volume is coming to him. What unfortunately I don't know is that he has any kind of high upside ceiling. So he's just a safer option. But if you want the higher upside swing, definitely lean towards the guys ranked behind him, particularly Mark Andrews and perhaps one of the Cleveland tight ends too. Then we have Colston Loveland, who's looked good, but again, lots of mouths to deal with. Luke Musgrave did not have the performance that we wanted in his debut as tight end 1 for Green Bay with the absence of Tucker Kraft there. I will say it was a poor performance from Jordan Love overall, so I'm not going to fault Luke Musgrave for an underwhelming performance when literally everybody, other than slightly Dontavian Wicks, it was just such an underwhelming day from a pass perspective. So we're still giving a top 20 option for Luke Musgrave there. More to come, potentially in better matchups here. Better pass volume for Jordan Love. TJ Hawkinson, again, it's hit or miss, unfortunately, so he falls further back. Sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. Mason Taylor, keep your eye on him for potential increased volume here with Garrett Wilson out. Evan Ingram, I can't trust at this point. Pat Freiermuth, quite frankly, I might raise this one up a little bit. Reasoning for that, again, we talked about it earlier. This is the matchup where he had that 2-touchdown performance previously. And quite frankly, every now and then, Aaron Rodgers will target him at a little, for touchdown passes. So, not the worst option in the world. And then Isaiah Likely on that one there. But yeah, those are the top tight end rankings there. It's a fun list. We have so many options this year at tight end. Super chat from Cordarius Kid. Thank you. Great call last week on Juwan Johnson, Tez Johnson, or Juwan Jennings in standard. Also Flacco or Caleb Williams to start there. So Tez or Juwan Jennings. I would go with Tez on that one. Again, we could potentially see Ricky Pearsall back. Quite frankly, he looked like a guy that was practicing to play this week. So that does potentially affect Juwan there. But overall, Juwan's been very steady, fine, no major issue there. I don't mind leaning into him, but Tez, I think, just has the higher ceiling there. And Juwan right now is ranked higher than Tez is, but again, I'll probably be moving him back just because of the potential there for Ricky Pearsall playing. So as of right now, Juwan is ranked higher, but by the time we reach Friday, and if Ricky Pearsall is active, it probably will be moving him back, and it would be Tez. So yeah. And then we're looking at standard league as well. Obviously, scratch that. Those are my tight end. Those are my wide receiver rankings in half PPR. In standard league, it definitely gives the edge to Tez Johnson because, again, the touchdown equity, he's had 4 touchdowns over the past 4 games here. Juwan just doesn't have that touchdown equity at this point, unfortunately, and that's heavily related to Christian McCaffrey there. And George Kittle as well. So yeah, Tez definitely leans that direction. And then again, Ricky hurts Juwan as well. Between Flacco and Caleb Williams there, I do have Flacco higher. Again, I like Caleb Williams, talked about him earlier in the show, like him a lot. I do trust him at this point. I'm trusting the improvement that we've seen in his fantasy performance over the past couple of weeks here. But at the end of the day, Joe Flacco has been putting up the consistent QB1 numbers and has an excellent matchup here. So we lean that direction on him. And thank you. Thank you again for the super chat and the shout out on the call with Juwan Johnson. All right. From Alice C., Trey Tucker, Keon Coleman, Mac Collins, Mac Collins, Slayton, Higgins, pick 2 for upside. Thanks. For upside. Excellent. So Higgins for sure. Well, depends on that could be Jaden Higgins, quite frankly. If it was T Higgins, obviously we'd take T Higgins, but that could be Jaden Higgins in that grouping here. If Darius Slayton were to play, it would be Darius Slayton that would have the highest upside with our glorious king, Jameis Williams, or Jameis Winston. Yeah, if Darius Slayton does manage to play through the injury here, the hamstring injury, we got to keep our eye on that. But if so, I would throw him out 10 times over with Jameis Winston. That's just a beautiful combination of deep threat, downfield looks. I really think we could lean into that. Otherwise, it would definitely have to be Trey Tucker. We're going to give him one more chance here at redemption in the good matchup here. And then, Mac Hollins would be the next one that I would turn to. Mac Hollins would be the next one that I would turn to. Again, with Kayshon Boutte out, his increased presence on the field, increased targets there. So yeah, upside is definitely the way that I would lean on that one. Cannot trust Keon Coleman at this point, unfortunately. Any streaming defenses? Yeah, let's look. I can never remember defense ownership percentages off the top of my head, so bear with me on this one. But in theory, Atlanta versus Carolina would be a good option. One that I think is very interesting this week is San Francisco against Arizona. Is very intriguing. And again, Jacoby Brissett has been fantastic, but turnover prone. So that is a potential option there. And then Chicago is an interesting streaming option as well with the matchup against JJ McCarthy. Again, turnovers have been a potential issue there, but Atlanta would be my top one there for sure. Let's see here. Good question from Noel Santos. Gainwell or Sean Tucker? I lean towards Sean Tucker. Gainwell's role has been interesting. I still believe, I've seen some weird, worry about Caleb Johnson. No, I don't think that's. Yeah, it's good to see him active and getting a couple carries there, but I don't think that's any kind of threat. Gainwell is still the RB2, and he does have standalone value. And this matchup obviously is very intriguing for him. Actually, let me go back and see. Because this was a good matchup. This was a good performance for Jalen Warren in the first matchup, but I cannot remember off the top of my head how Gainwell did in this matchup. Gainwell in the first matchup with Cincinnati. No, he had 3 fantasy points. Yeah, this was not one of the good ones. I lean towards Sean Tucker on that one. Again, Sean Tucker's performance last week was not eye-popping from a fantasy perspective. It was only 6 fantasy points. But again, he was the more effective back, excellent yards per carry, good amount of carries. I believe it was, I can't remember if it was 9 or if it was 13. I can't remember which week was which, but it was either 9 or 13 carries. And then the previous week was the other number. I can't remember off the top of my head. But good amount of carries, good yardage. And I still think at some point we could get a touchdown opportunity for him as well. I think he would have goal line preference there. So my lean is towards Sean Tucker in that one in terms of seeing a potential increased role with him with the underwhelming performances here from Rachaad White. And then one more super chat here from Meggie Blue 2. Would you drop Monangai or Worthy for Algier? Yes, I would drop Worthy for Algier. I would not drop Monangai. So I would drop Worthy for Algier because at this point, I don't feel comfortable putting Worthy into a starting lineup. I would rather stash Monangai and Algier on my bench for the massive upside that both of them would have if DeAndre Swift or Bijan Robinson went down. Yeah, at this point, guys, stacking and stashing your high upside running backs there is always a really good call. Just because, again, overall here, we want to start building for the fantasy playoffs, and all of our fab is low. We don't want to be fighting there on waivers trying to get the high end handcuffs there if somebody goes down. So it's always good to stash because mediocre and I hate to call Xavier Worthy a mediocre wide receiver, but he is performing at a mediocre level in terms of fantasy points. So mediocre fantasy producing wide receivers are a dime a dozen on waivers. You can always go pick one up. And then one more super chat from Joe Castles. Garrett Wilson. Ooh, Garrett Wilson and Sutton for Waddle. Yes. Yeah. Do that immediately. right now. Yeah, Garrett Wilson, I'm high-key concerned that we might not see him for a month. From what I've heard from injury experts, it's a re-aggravation of the same injury. And when you get those re-aggravations, you get those extended timelines for recovery. So he was on a 2-week timeline before. We could easily see him be out 4 to 5 weeks on this one. That's kind of the expectation there. He might not go on IR, but that does not mean that we will see him in the near future here. So, and especially because the Jets aren't I'm apprehensive here. And then obviously we talked about Sutton underperforming. Waddle is so strong, and we love Waddle's playoff schedule. Again, Miami's playoff schedule is fantastic, and they are finally in Miami during the playoffs. They have Pittsburgh in week 15 is what it is, right? But at least that's earlier to where hopefully it won't be like super, super cold in Pittsburgh that Tua can't deal with. But weeks 16 and 17 are in Miami against Cincinnati and Tampa Bay. Yeah, grab your Jalen Waddle. Grab it. Upside is going to be massive, massive. All right. And then from Jocelyn, drop Tootin to stash Saints defense for the playoffs. Good idea. I mean, the only thing that I don't like about stashing a defense that long is we get into the issue, unfortunately, of what happens if you need to use a waiver spot on something that pops up significantly. Like odds of holding on to the defense that long, 50-50 there. So I don't hate it. If you've got like a ton of bench spots, it's not a major issue. If you can hold on to it, I don't think it's a problem. But again, it's just a matter of, how long you can actually hold on to that. And then was offered Warren and Adunze for Bowers. What do I do? Ooh, Warren and Adunze for Bowers. What do I do? If you have another stable option at tight end, I would take that, quite frankly. And then one more super chat here from Robert Moore. Would you trade Rico and I assume that's Alec Pierce to get Saquon? Yeah, I assume that's Alec Pierce. Or wait, no, you're saying and a piece. I'm stupid. Yeah. Would you trade Rico and a piece to get Saquon? Yeah, I would. Yeah, and I trust Rico rest of season. And he's performed at such a high level, although we did finally see like a slight chink in the armor. Okay, yeah, super known. You also said that you have Gadsden. Yeah, if you've got Gadsden, I feel really good about Gadsden rest of season. So making that trade to trade away Bowers, I'm okay with that. That's fine. I think that's more than enough to get him. So yeah, I would make that trade and stick it out with Gadsden rest of season. But back to you, Robert Moore. Rico and a piece, as long as it's a little piece, like a little tiny one, not like something significant. I do feel like, again, we did finally see that bounce back of Saquon. Last week was not fantastic, but we know the upside is there. And then looking at his rest of season schedule, playoffs are good, right? Detroit, we're obviously going to, looking right now. Detroit, obviously, I would expect us to get mediocre production here. I'm not going to lie. But then we get Dallas, Chicago, LA Chargers, But then we get into the playoffs, week 15, Vegas, Washington, Buffalo. Yeah. I think that's a good option right there. When we're looking at Rico's playoff schedule, it is tougher, to be quite frank there. New Orleans is not a layup. Tampa, Tampa's been good against the run, and Seattle is tough against the run. So you've got one of 3 matchups there that is good. But yeah, I would make that trade. That one seems fine. And then Joseph, thank you. My cold is better. I feel like I went to the doctor. I got a plethora of like allergy medicine, because he couldn't figure it out. So he gave me like antibiotics and allergy medicine and the cough syrups. It was like, okay, this is weird. Like, we're just going to give you a little bit of everything and try and see if we can flush it out. So I'm better now. Thank you so much. And then Knicks or Darnold, I would go with Darnold on that one. I don't trust Knicks, unfortunately, this week. I don't love the matchup. And at this point, I don't feel like we can trust Knicks in general here. But that wraps things up, guys. I appreciate you all tuning in. Again, I'm sorry about the late start. So thank you all for sticking with me. Again, this is a podcast. the Jameis Fantasy Podcast. So I would appreciate it if you guys could subscribe. It's available on all platforms here. And then also, as always, I never ask for subscriptions until the end. As always, if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel, that would be fantastic. It's Terra time. It's simple. You're here. And outside of that, if you have any questions, as always, feel free. If I didn't get to any of your questions, feel free to drop them on any of the videos and I will get to them for sure. And then, of course, I hope you all have a fantastic week. Can't wait to hear how you did. And I will talk to you all again, same time, same place next week, Wednesday, 8 p.m. EST. Other than that, have a fantastic week. Bye, guys.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.